"Security, remove her." The voice of Diane Holloway cut through the crowded dining hall with the precision of a closing door. Conversation stopped. Silverware rested against china. Even the wheels of a nearby walker became still. At the front of the room, Marissa Lane stood beneath the cold fluorescent lights with a folded receipt in one hand. She had expected resistance when 3 families contacted the Elder Rights Network and asked her to examine unexplained charges on the accounts of their parents. She had not expected Diane to revive the accusation that had destroyed her life 7 years earlier. Near the back wall, Evan Caldwell rose slowly from his chair. He had come to Willow Haven to question the growing balance on the account for his mother. He had not expected to face the woman he once promised to trust. Marissa looked older than she had on the day their divorce became final, but not weaker. Her chestnut hair rested against a charcoal coat. Her expression carried the controlled exhaustion of someone forced to stand inside an old lie. 2 facility employees moved toward her. Evan stepped into the aisle. Marissa stopped him with one steady glance. She did not need him to rescue her. Diane folded her hands over the podium. She told the room that Marissa had been dismissed after $18,000 disappeared from the Resident Assistance Fund. She claimed Marissa had returned under the false title of investigator to frighten residents and damage Willow Haven. A murmur moved through the room. Some families looked at Marissa with suspicion. Others lowered their eyes. Ruth Caldwell sat in the front row with a purple sweater around her narrow shoulders. Evan watched his mother reach into her handbag, but he could not see what she removed. Marissa waited until the whispering faded. She explained that every family who contacted her had received the same instruction: bring every receipt connected to the new resident stability fee. Diane gave a controlled smile and said there was nothing unusual about the fee. Marissa unfolded the paper in her hand. Then this should be easy to explain. One employee stopped beside her. The other waited near the aisle. Marissa lifted the receipt toward the residents. "If your paper carries receipt number 417, please raise it now." For a moment, no one moved. Then Ruth raised her hand. The receipt between her fingers trembled under the overhead lights. A man beside the window raised an identical paper. 3 more appeared near the back. Then 10. Then 20. Papers rose throughout the dining hall like pale signals from people who had spent too long believing their questions did not matter. Evan counted 47. Every receipt carried a different resident name and payment date, yet each showed the same receipt number and the same approval mark. The smile of Diane disappeared. Marissa turned toward her. "A receipt number can be corrected once. It cannot belong to 47 different payments." The room went silent. 7 years earlier, Willow Haven had also produced records that appeared impossible to challenge. Evan had trusted those records. He had signed a statement. He had watched Marissa leave their home carrying one suitcase, and a silence he mistook for guilt. Diane reached beneath the podium and removed a blue binder. She opened it to a protected page and held it where everyone could see the signature at the bottom. Before anyone decides whom to believe, perhaps Evan Caldwell should explain why he signed this statement against his own wife. That signature does not prove she stole anything. The woman who spoke wore a gray state identification badge and carried a sealed document envelope. Camille Ross was a compliance attorney working with the Ohio Department of Health. She arrived at Willow Haven shortly after 8 the next morning, because Marissa had already filed a formal complaint before the family meeting. The 47 matching receipts gave the agency grounds to issue an immediate records preservation notice. Photographs of the papers and written statements from 12 families had entered the state system overnight. Diane stood behind the reception desk as Camille explained that Willow Haven had 48 hours to surrender billing records, access logs, vendor agreements, archived complaints, and correspondence connected to the resident stability fee. No record could be altered, removed, or destroyed. Evan waited beside Ruth in the lobby. His mother sat in a cushioned chair with both hands resting over her handbag. Marissa stood several feet away and spoke with 2 residents who had found additional charges. She had not looked at Evan since Diane displayed his statement. That distance unsettled him more than anger would have. 7 years earlier, Marissa had demanded an answer from him. Now she expected nothing. Diane placed the blue binder on the counter. She said Evan had personally confirmed that Marissa removed protected records from the facility. Marissa answered that the papers she carried were copies of receipts and written complaints voluntarily given to her by residents. They were not original facility files. Camille opened the binder without reacting. She explained that Marissa had submitted evidence as a representative of the families who contacted her, but the state would direct the review. Diane turned toward Evan and asked him to confirm the statement. Camille slid the page across the counter. "Is this your signature?" Evan looked at the final page. The handwriting was his. "Yes." "Did you write this statement?" "No. It was prepared for me." "Did you read it before signing?" The question was simple, but the answer opened an old wound. Evan remembered Diane placing the document before him late at night. She had described it as a timeline confirming that Marissa brought resident papers home. Evan had seen those folders on their kitchen table. He also knew the residents had given the papers to her. He had been exhausted, embarrassed, and desperate to believe the situation could end without damaging his new position as a school principal. "I read part of it." Camille turned the first page toward him. One sentence stated that Marissa removed protected financial records without permission and concealed them inside the Caldwell home. Evan read it twice. "I never said she concealed anything." Diane answered that his signature appeared beneath the statement. Evan replied that he signed what she described as a timeline verification. Marissa finally looked at him. Her face showed no relief. This was the truth she had waited 7 years to hear, and it had arrived too late to feel like a gift. Camille opened another folder. Inside were resident complaints filed after the dismissal of Marissa. Each closing notice said the concern resembled claims already disproved during the earlier investigation. A copy of the statement from Evan appeared behind every notice. Different residents, different dates, the same signature. How many complaints were closed with this? Camille placed the final stack before him. 23. Evan understood that his silence had not ended when Marissa walked out of their marriage. It had continued speaking for him every time another resident tried to tell the truth. "Tell me one thing, Evan. Did you sign because you believed them, or because believing me would cost you more?" 7 years earlier, Marissa had asked that question in their kitchen while rain traced thin lines across the window. Evan remembered the untouched coffee between them. He remembered the yellow light above the sink, and the folder of resident receipts, resting beside the keys of Marissa. Earlier that evening, Diane had called them into Willow Haven and announced that $18,000 was missing from the Resident Assistance Fund. The access badge assigned to Marissa had opened the accounting office at 8:43. A hallway camera showed a woman in a dark coat carrying a box toward the rear exit. The image was blurred, but the coat resembled one Marissa owned. Diane presented each detail slowly and allowed suspicion to harden before Marissa could answer. Evan asked where she had been. Marissa said she had attended a confidential meeting with someone who reported irregular charges. Evan asked for the name. Marissa refused because revealing the source could expose a vulnerable resident to retaliation. She offered to provide the meeting location and attendance record to an independent investigator. Diane refused and declared that Willow Haven would handle the matter internally. Evan should have questioned that decision. Instead, the polished table, organized binders, and official language persuaded him that the truth must already be inside the room. Later that night, Diane placed a prepared statement before him. It correctly said that Marissa had brought papers from residents into their home. It falsely described those papers as protected facility records removed without permission. Diane called the document a simple timeline verification. Evan read the opening paragraph, glanced at the final page, and signed. He did not read the sentence claiming Marissa had concealed confidential files. By the time they returned to the kitchen, Willow Haven had suspended her employment and told its governing board that an internal security violation explained the missing money. Marissa stood across from Evan and waited for an answer to her question. He wanted to say that he believed the woman he had married. He also feared that the scandal could reach the school district where he had recently become principal. He feared losing the career he had spent years building. Most of all, he feared choosing a person when an institution claimed to possess proof. His silence lasted only a few seconds, but Marissa understood it. "You already chose." The next morning, she packed one suitcase and left their home. Their divorce did not begin with a dramatic argument. It began with a signature and the absence of one necessary sentence. In the present, Evan sat alone at his dining table with copies of the 23 closed complaints spread before him. He studied the access log attached to his old statement and noticed an archived staffing notice Camille had included. Marissa had been assigned to an off-site resident advocacy appointment from 6:30 until 9:15 on the night the fund disappeared. The legal center visitor record confirmed her arrival and departure without identifying the confidential resident. Only Diane, the finance director, the security supervisor, and Marissa had received the staffing notice. Her badge entered the accounting office while she was still 3 miles away. Whoever used it had known the exact period when she would be absent and the exact confidentiality rule that would make her explanation difficult. I did not keep recipes in that box. Ruth Caldwell placed a faded blue tin on the community room table and pushed it toward Marissa. The lid was scratched along the edges. A strip of masking tape across the top carried the words Sunday supper in the careful handwriting of Ruth. Evan had seen the box in the kitchen of his mother since childhood. He remembered index cards covered with measurements and stains from years of use. When Marissa lifted the lid, there were no recipes inside. Beneath 3 blank cards rested dozens of folded receipts, copied account statements, handwritten dates, and sealed envelopes bearing resident names. Camille approved the review because every document belonged to Ruth or had been voluntarily given to her by another resident. A state records officer observed from across the room while Marissa and Evan worked at the same table. Marissa wore thin cotton gloves and separated the papers by year. Evan opened his laptop but hesitated before touching anything. The archived staffing notice lay between them. You were 3 miles away when your badge opened the accounting office. Marissa did not look up. I know where I was. Why did you never show me the schedule? Her hand stopped for a moment. I told you an independent investigator could verify my location. Diane refused one, and you accepted her decision. The answer was quiet, but it left no place for Evan to hide. He lowered his eyes and began entering receipt numbers into a spreadsheet. Ruth watched them with sadness and determination. She had once believed her son and Marissa could survive anything if they remained honest. Now she understood that honesty failed when one person spoke and the other chose not to listen. For nearly an hour, the only sounds were paper sliding across wood and the soft tapping of keys. Then, Marissa unfolded a receipt dated 7 years and 3 months earlier. It listed a $200 contribution to the Resident Assistance Fund from Helen Avery. The paper carried receipt number 417. Evan checked the employment record for Marissa. She had not begun working at Willow Haven until 3 months after that payment. The repeated number existed before you arrived. Marissa studied the paper, and it was not an innocent printing error. The same $200 later appeared on the monthly statement for Helen as an unpaid balance. Willow Haven had accepted her payment but never credited her account. Another resident paid the same fee under the same receipt number the following week. The pattern continued across 5 names. Ruth removed a small envelope from the tin. Helen had given it to her before moving away. Inside was a handwritten note explaining that management called the first receipt invalid and demanded another payment before approving the transfer of Helen. She paid because she feared losing her room. Evan asked how long Ruth had kept the documents. Long enough to know people were being ignored. Marissa turned the original receipt over. On the back was an approval line used before Willow Haven changed to digital records. Beneath it was a full signature confirming that the payment had been received and entered into the assistance fund. Evan recognized the narrow handwriting. 3 months before Marissa began working at Willow Haven, the earliest duplicated receipt in the box had been approved by Diane Holloway. The company has no office, no employees, and no legitimate reason to receive money from 47 residents. Marissa placed a corporate registration report beside the receipt approved by Diane. The company was called Evergreen Resident Services. It was registered to a post office box outside Columbus and claimed to provide senior transportation. Willow Haven records described payments to it as Resident Support Administration. The company had been dissolved 6 years earlier, but the facility continued using its old vendor profile. Camille stood at the end of the community room table, with a state financial analyst beside her. Willow Haven had met the first records deadline, although several boxes arrived without indexes and 2 digital folders required passwords that management claimed to have misplaced. Camille documented every omission and extended the preservation notice to the outside accounting firm used by Willow Haven. The analyst compared bank summaries with receipts from the blue tin. Each time a resident paid a support fee, the payment briefly appeared in the Willow Haven system. Within 1 day, the entry was reversed as a correction and moved through the inactive vendor profile. The resident balance remained unpaid, allowing the facility to collect the same money again. Receipt number 417 connected the papers held by residents to the reversed ledger entries. It was not proof of every transfer by itself, but it provided a credible pattern for the independent audit. Evan sat across from Marissa and reviewed the archived complaint files. He had hoped his old statement had been attached carelessly to a few unrelated cases. The records removed that comfort. One resident questioned a missing transportation deposit. Another challenged a repeated maintenance fee. A third reported that a support payment disappeared after she received a printed receipt. Each complaint ended with nearly identical language. The concern was considered unreliable because it resembled allegations made by Marissa, whose conduct had supposedly been confirmed by a member of her household. Behind every closing notice appeared the signature of Evan. "They treated my statement like evidence against people I never met." Marissa replied that they treated it like permission. She did not raise her voice. For 7 years, Evan had thought his worst failure belonged to a private moment between husband and wife. The papers showed something larger. His decision had become an institutional shield. Diane did not need to disprove every resident. She only needed to connect each complaint to Marissa and place the statement from Evan behind it. The financial analyst opened a spreadsheet recovered from the accounting firm. 23 complaint numbers appeared in one column. Beside them was the same instruction. Attach lane statement, close as repetitive. Camille asked whether Marissa had ever been contacted about those complaints. Marissa said no. Evan opened the final folder. It contained a complaint filed 8 months after Marissa left Willow Haven. The resident reported that a $300 assistance payment had vanished. She included a receipt and asked for an independent review. Management closed the case within 2 days. The response from Diane described it as another attempt to revive disproved accusations. The statement from Evan appeared on the next page. He recognized the careful signature at the bottom of the complaint. The resident Diane had silenced with his name was Ruth Caldwell. "I was the person Marissa protected." The confession from Ruth settled over the community room more heavily than any accusation from Diane. Evan remained seated with the complaint from his mother open before him. Marissa lowered her eyes out of respect for a promise she had kept for 7 years. Ruth explained that she first noticed missing payments while helping another resident organize monthly statements. Before moving to Willow Haven, she had spent 34 years processing payroll for a manufacturing company. She understood how corrections should appear in a ledger. Repeated receipt numbers, reverse deposits, and unpaid balances were not ordinary mistakes. Ruth quietly collected copies and asked Marissa to meet her at the Franklin County Senior Legal Center. Their confidential appointment was the meeting Marissa attended when her badge entered the accounting office. Evan asked why Ruth had not come to him. She said she had intended to. Before she could, Diane summoned her to the executive office and placed a transfer assessment on the desk. It claimed Willow Haven might no longer be able to meet her needs. Diane suggested that a sister facility nearly 2 hours away had an available room. She never directly ordered Ruth to remain silent. She simply mentioned the possible transfer whenever Ruth asked about missing payments. Diane knew distance would make family visits difficult. Marissa offered to report the pattern while protecting the identity of Ruth. That was why she refused to name her source during the internal investigation. If Diane learned who provided the records, she could revive the transfer process before an outside agency had time to review it. Evan turned toward Marissa. "You lost your job to protect my mother." Marissa answered that she protected a resident who trusted her. Being the mother of Evan made the silence harder, not more important. Evan asked what his signature had changed. Marissa said it ended something different. She explained that she could have told him about an older receipt carrying number 417. She could have given him the name Helen Avery and asked him to verify the date without exposing Ruth. After seeing his signature, Marissa decided he had already chosen the institution over her. She stopped asking him to investigate and walked away. "I was wrong about one thing. I believed your first failure was the final answer you would ever give me." Evan absorbed the words without defending himself. The decision of Marissa had not caused the fraud or justified the false accusation. It revealed how completely trust between them had collapsed. He chose safety over courage. She chose silence over one final test of the truth. Ruth placed her hand over the closed complaint. "Neither of you knew how many people would be affected. Now you do." Camille entered carrying a notice from the financial analyst. A bank authorization for Evergreen had been approved through the executive office of Willow Haven. A formal interview with Diane was scheduled for the following morning. Then the phone of Evan vibrated. The message came from the private number used by Diane. "I have a proposal that may protect the room of your mother." Come to my office at 7. Come alone. Evan showed the message to Marissa. She returned the phone without changing her expression. You do not owe me another promise. Whatever you choose next must be because you finally understand what your silence costs. Diane was offering the same refuge he had accepted 7 years earlier, safety in exchange for one more silence. One sentence can erase the debt of your mother. Diane placed a prepared letter in front of Evan at 7 that evening. Her office was dim except for a brass lamp that cast a narrow circle across the account file for Ruth. Outside the closed door, Willow Haven had settled into its nightly quiet. Evan remained standing. He had spent 7 years remembering the last document Diane asked him to sign. This time, he read the first line before touching the chair. The letter declared that Ruth had become confused about her finances, that Marissa had encouraged false memories, and that the Caldwell family wished to withdraw every complaint. In return, Willow Haven would erase more than $11,000 from the account for Ruth, cancel the transfer assessment, and guarantee her current room. Diane also promised to withdraw the old allegation from the employment record of Marissa. You can protect both of them. All you have to do is sign. Evan read the letter from beginning to end. 7 years earlier, fear had made official language feel safer than the voice of his wife. Now every sentence revealed its real price. Diane was asking him to discredit his mother and clear Marissa through another lie. Why would you withdraw the allegation if you still believe Marissa stole the money? Diane answered that removing an allegation was not the same as admitting it was wrong. Evan said the truth did not matter to her. Diane replied that people usually remembered the explanation that reached them first. Evan finally understood how she had controlled Willow Haven. She did not need every lie to survive. She only needed doubt to arrive before the truth. He placed the unsigned letter back on her desk. My mother is not confused. Marissa did not create those receipts. I will not withdraw anything. Diane warned that the school board might learn its principal had signed a false financial statement. Evan answered that the board deserved to know. He left the office without asking what the decision might cost him. The next morning, he informed his superintendent and provided a complete account of his involvement. At 8, he met Camille and an agency attorney at the state field office. Evan submitted a sworn correction stating that Diane prepared the original document, misrepresented its purpose, and included language he never provided. He admitted that he failed to read every sentence before signing. He did not call himself a victim or ask the state to excuse him. Then he resigned as chair of the Willow Haven Family Council, because residents deserved representation free from his past mistake. When he returned to the facility, Marissa waited near the reception desk. He gave her a copy of the correction. She read it slowly. This does not restore what we lost. Evan said he knew. It does not make you the person who cleared my name. You cleared your own name. I am correcting mine. Marissa saw no request hidden behind his apology. He had not acted to win her back or obtain forgiveness. He acted because the truth required something from him. Later that morning, Camille arrived with an emergency consent order approved by the facility board and state regulators. An independent financial monitor would control billing. New admissions were suspended. Resident transfers required outside review. The financial access of Diane was revoked while the investigation continued. The correction from Evan had already entered the record before anyone knew the order would be served. For once, he had chosen the truth without knowing whether it would protect him. Diane Holloway, please hand over the facility keys. The independent administrator spoke without anger, yet every conversation in the Willow Haven lobby stopped. Diane stood behind the reception desk as Camille placed the emergency consent order beside the visitor log. No reporters waited outside. No residents gathered to celebrate. Justice arrived through signed pages, numbered requirements, and a state seal on a document Diane could not dismiss. Her access to billing systems had already been disabled. The outside accounting firm had suspended every transfer connected to Evergreen Resident Services. A broader review of 12 years of resident payments had begun. Diane read the order twice before removing a brass keyring from her pocket. She placed it on the counter and asked to retrieve personal belongings from her office. The administrator assigned an employee to accompany her. Diane offered no confession and no apology. She crossed the lobby beneath the gaze of residents whose complaints she had reduced to file numbers. Then she disappeared down the corridor she had controlled for years. Marissa watched without satisfaction. She had not returned to Willow Haven to see Diane humiliated. She returned because vulnerable people were still paying for a lie that should have ended long ago. By afternoon, the independent audit team issued a preliminary finding. Receipt number 417 had been repeatedly attached to separate resident payments. The related ledger entries were later reversed and routed through an inactive vendor profile. The earliest repeated receipt predated the employment of Marissa. The access records from the night the assistance fund disappeared were considered unreliable because the archive schedule and legal center visitor record confirmed that Marissa was attending a confidential appointment 3 miles away. Willow Haven withdrew its accusation against her in writing. Camille handed Marissa a signed copy. Marissa read every sentence before folding the document into her bag. Her name was cleared, but the page could not return 7 years of work, trust, or marriage. Evan asked how it felt. Accurate. It was not forgiveness, but it was the truth. That evening, residents gathered in the same dining hall where Diane had called Marissa a thief. The independent administrator explained that disputed balances would be suspended during review, improper charges would be refunded, and no resident could be moved in retaliation for participating. A resident advisory group would monitor the repayment process. When the explanation ended, Evan walked to the front carrying 2 pages. The first was his original statement. The second was his sworn correction. He remained on the same floor as the residents. My signature was used to close 23 complaints. I did not understand how the statement would be used when I signed it, but I chose not to read it carefully, and I remained silent after the person I should have trusted asked me to question what I had been shown. Evan read the false language, and then the correction. He did not blame Diane for every decision he made. He did not ask Marissa to defend him, or Ruth to soften the truth. When he finished, the room stayed quiet. The silence was not rejection. It was the space accountability required before anyone decided what came next. Evan returned to his seat beside Ruth. She removed the worn receipt that had started the meeting and placed it in his palm. Receipt number 417 remained visible beneath the crease made by her hand. Ruth closed his fingers around the paper. Keep the paper that taught you to listen. Do not sign it yet. Marissa placed the volunteer application in front of Evan and rested her hand beside the final line. 9 months had passed since Willow Haven entered independent supervision. Spring sunlight crossed the community room floor where 47 residents had once raised matching receipts under cold fluorescent lights. The room had changed. A large monthly ledger hung behind clear glass and showed every resident fee, correction, refund, and vendor payment. Plain language explanations appeared beside each total. Nothing important remained hidden in a locked office. Ruth sat at the head of the Resident Finance Council and wore the same purple sweater from the family meeting. Her hands were steadier now. The audit had corrected her balance, canceled the false debt, and returned payments Willow Haven failed to credit. Similar adjustments had been made for dozens of current and former residents. Older complaints were still under review, and the investigation involving Diane and Evergreen Resident Services continued through the proper state process. Marissa did not measure justice by whether Diane apologized. She measured it by residents who no longer feared asking what appeared on their statements. Her work with the Elder Rights Network expanded after the investigation. She trained family advocates to recognize repeated receipt numbers, unexplained reversals, and pressure disguised as administrative policy. Evan did not ask to join that work. He understood that entering the professional life of Marissa without invitation would turn accountability into another demand. Instead, he spent Saturdays at Willow Haven, helping residents organize correspondence, complete online forms, and prepare questions for council meetings. He never spoke for anyone who could speak independently. He made sure the documents were readable and the questions reached the correct office. Trust returned in small and measurable pieces. A corrected statement. A promise kept without announcement. A difficult conversation that did not end when discomfort began. Evan and Marissa occasionally shared coffee after meetings led by Ruth, but neither called those conversations a reunion. Marissa had built a full life after the divorce. Evan understood that regret gave him no claim on it. That morning, the resident council approved a permanent volunteer position for someone who would help families review agreements before signing. Ruth suggested Evan. The residents agreed only after discussing his history openly. Evan accepted their caution. Now, Marissa had brought him the application. Read the responsibilities. Read the conflict policy. Read the paragraph about resident confidentiality twice. Evan asked what came next. Then decide whether you can honor every line. He began at the top. Marissa remained across from him and answered questions when he asked. Ruth watched from the window as sunlight reached the worn receipt displayed near the public ledger. Receipt number 417 had become a reminder that evidence mattered, but listening had to begin before evidence became convenient. Evan reached the final paragraph and paused. This position does not restore trust automatically. Trust must be evaluated through consistent conduct. He looked at Marissa. That belongs in more than a volunteer policy. Yes, it does. Evan signed the application and returned the pen. Marissa checked the page and placed it in the approved folder. She did not promise that their marriage would be rebuilt. She offered something smaller and more honest. Your first shift is next Thursday. The council meets at 4. You may sit beside me if you arrive early. Evan nodded. It was not the life they had lost, and neither pretended it was. It was a new beginning with boundaries, responsibility, and enough truth for one careful step forward. This time, his signature followed the truth.